The apprenticeship wrap or exam wrap is a great way to prepare for any perming hairstyling exam. This wrapping technique allows you to practice following the curve of the head along the hairline, which is where most of the change occurs in the head shape. It also allows you to practice wrapping with a variety of diameter of perm rods. When you choose your perm rod, always look at the length of the hair. I'm using white, gray, and pink rods, and that seems to be suitable for this hair length, which is approximately 4.5 inches long. But if the hair is longer, adjust your rod size. You may want to use a purple, white, and gray. If the hair is shorter, you may want to go with a gray, pink, and blue. Just make the adjustment to show that you understand how perm rod choice relates to the desired curl pattern, of course, that the client wants, but also to the length of the hair. To start your sectioning, you're going to make a high side part. We don't want this part to be too low, because if it is too low, we're going to be wrapping towards the heavy side. This first perm rod would always fall over. And we don't want to use any perm picks. We want to be able to show and demonstrate that we have accurate tension to control this hair and move it in a manner to follow the hairline, and also have the perm rods positioned correctly so that they do stay in place and we're not counting on any perm picks. So to start with, once you've got your high side part, determine with the length of your rod where you're going to start making a vertical curved parting to create this front panel. So we're measuring, and remember, it doesn't matter which color we measure with, because the length of the rods is all the same. What changes in our rods is the diameter. So we can use any rod to measure our length, and we're just going to make a curved parting from our point to behind the ear. And the reason that we need a curved parting is because the hairline curves in, and then this line has to curve out to match that. And we just want to always make sure that our curve is creating a panel that is going to fit the length of the rod. So when we look at this, when we're all done our panel, always check to make sure that we are going to be length of a rod. We don't want it to be too large. Once you've got your panel sectioned, make sure it's nice and clean, your sectioning. We're ready to begin to wrap. So on this part of the head, we usually can use horizontal sections. In the receding area, we need to do some pivoting. And in this part, below the lower the receding area, we can go back to horizontal sections. So remember, your subsections are always the diameter of the rod being used. Always use the technique of palm up. Determine the base placement that you've been instructed to do. For me, I'm going to maintain the half base placement. Place your end paper and determine which end paper wrap you're supposed to be using if you're practicing for an exam. I'm just going to use the bookend wrap. Most exams, you can use the bookend, you can use the double flat wrap, you can also use the single flat wrap. And remember, if you're wrapping and you have hair that is protruding up as you wrap, sometimes you get those hairs that pop out, do use a single flat wrap to control those ends. Comb from root to ends. Position your end paper, work with your palm up, and follow the slant of the head. So if you position a rod on the head, you can see that rod has to be slanted forward to follow the curve of the head. So always check the curve of the head ahead of time. You may be doing this on a model, live model, or you may be doing this on a mannequin. Keep going with your horizontal sections that are the diameter of the rod being used. Maintain your palm up. Make sure all your ends are in the end papers. You don't want to have any fish hook ends for this client. Make sure your elastics are straight. Remember, sometimes as you're rolling, the elastic will twist in your hand. So sometimes we have to let that elastic go. Before we fasten it, let it go before you fasten it. And roll back and forth in order to spool that hair onto that perm rod evenly. So now we've done our 4 larger colored rods. Now we're ready to switch to our next rod. It usually takes about 12 rods to fill this panel, but it might take more, maybe a few less. And here we can see we've put our rods on using horizontal sections, but if I use a horizontal section now, you can see that there is a pie shaping that happens. And that pie shaping tells me that I need to pivot. It's wider here, narrower there. So it tells me that I need to take a section that is narrow at the front to wide at the back. But remember, never go wider than the diameter of the rod that you're using. And by taking this wide to narrow section, it's going to allow us to turn these rods to follow the curve of the head. Let your elastic go before you secure it. Now when I put my comb horizontal, I still see a pie shaping. So I need to take another narrow to wide. And a lot of times I find that the narrow to wide sections are mostly the middle size rod that I'm using. Now I just want to show you one other thing. When you put your end paper on, sometimes people drag the end paper and it kind of creates this C shaping when the end paper is on. Make sure that you pull that end paper back and this hair along the hairline becomes straight again, not curved in, if that happens as you put your end paper on. Make sure your ends are in. Make sure you're aware of the head shape, whether you have to curve that rod in or not. Let your elastic go and secure it, and remember, make sure you can see your elastic. You don't want that elastic to be tucked in any way. We want to be able to see them, because if they tuck in, they could cause an indent and a weak spot on the hair. So I need another narrow to wide. Make sure this hair is straight. Make sure your ends are in. continue to wrap. Let the elastic go. And probably just one more narrow to wide. And that'll also be my last gray rod or mid-sized rod. And then we'll be moving to the smallest rod. And now we're ready to, we can see when we put my comb horizontally, we can now see that I am pretty horizontal. If I go to make a narrow to wide section, my comb is going down on a diagonal. So to maintain the horizontal line, I now have a rectangular section. So that tells me I'm ready to stop pivoting. I have turned and made the curve needed to follow the shape of this head. Double check your section to make sure that it hasn't changed and you still have a nice clean line there. And now our subsections are slightly smaller because we're switching rod size to a smaller rod size. That rod is not twisted. That one was a little twisted, so I'm just going to undo it and re-secure it. Keep going horizontally with the subsection. And practice this. If you have a time limit that you need to perform this, practice it many times before your exam. It gives you more confidence if you know you can meet that time limit. There'll always be a little bit of stress or anxiety the day of your exam. That's normal. Anybody would be stressed and anxious when they write an exam, but we have to be able to practice and learn to deal with that. And then this would be too thick for one rod, so I'm going to have to do one rod, and I'll have some hair left over in the front. Now, if you have a small amount of hair like that, that's fine, don't panic. All you need to do is make sure that you can show that you recognize that that's a smaller subsection of hair, and you just need to change to a shorter rod. Don't put a long rod in there, because if you put a long rod in, sometimes that long rod will not sit right because it's not attached to anything. It has no scalp hair back here to attach to, so it'll end up tilting. So we want to show that we know this is where we would put a short rod. So make sure you have a short rod available just in case that happens. And it also depends if you're doing this on a client. Sometimes clients have a lower hairline and you'll need to do a shorter rod. So remember, these rods are a little more forward. Follow the curve, the indent at the receding area. Make sure this last rod is horizontal. When examiners walk up to look at this, the first thing they're going to notice is your section, how clean your section is. The second thing they're going to notice is your tension, how you've distributed the hair onto the rods, and it should look nice and even. They're also going to maybe have a peek at your subsections. You want to make sure that they're nice and clean and neat. They're also going to look at your elastics and make sure they can see them and that the elastics are not twisted or turned in to compensate for poor tension. If your elastics are all straight and your rods are sitting nicely positioned, that shows that you have the ability to distribute that hair evenly on each rod. They're going to notice that you did use your 3 diameters of rods. They're going to also notice the base placement. Is it the correct one? The base placement we can often see when we look from the back. We can see this is half base placement, and that is the correct one for what I'm doing, but always check again what is expected. They're going to probably come along and undo 1 to 3 rods. Sometimes 1 rod is undone just to look at the end paper and to make sure you don't have any fishhook ends. And sometimes a white rod, a gray rod, a pink rod, one of each size may be undone to make sure that you have distributed the hair evenly in the end paper and that you don't have any hair extending past the end paper. So remember to practice. If you have a time limit, you want to make sure that you have practiced and you can meet that time limit, and do this over and over and over and really get familiar with your mannequin or your client's hair and be well prepared for that exam permanent wave wrap.